and thank you all for coming here this morning. So some 4 years ago I was at a European Union funded conference in Addis Ababa to talk about the scourge of small arms and light weapons, which has fueled instability, repression, has stunted economic growth, democratisation, and has led to massive human rights abuses in Ethiopia and in the wider African Horn region. Now, what Europe as an entity can and cannot do about this is up for debate. But what is clear now in Europe is that member states are obliged to not export military items which have a clear risk of being used for internal repression, which are likely to contribute to tensions or otherwise be used in violations of international human rights law. This is European policy, not only because it reflects its commitment to human rights, to supporting democratisation and development, but also because it serves external policy and the foreign policy objectives of its member states. Fundamentally, what it means for campaigners in the arms control world is that European companies and arms dealers, member states who authorise it, cannot simply act with impunity in selling equipment to places where it's quite simply used to prolong human suffering. Now, while this framework exists, we must remember that the world is changing massively. Just as conflicts are now less and less between states, political control is no longer just about demonstrating and exerting hard military power, and technologies which can be used for abuses are no longer simply leg chains and stun batons. With more and more of our information flowing through networks, governments have an unprecedented insight into individuals and into societies as a whole through the use of our data and intelligence. Modern surveillance technologies have fundamental implications for our right to privacy, freedom of expression and assembly, and to individual security. It's now impossible to go to a modern arms show, be it in London, in Paris, in Dubai or Johannesburg, without seeing companies selling the technology necessary to monitor, intercept communications, to track people, and other kind of surveillance technologies. This has profound implications. The export of European-made technologies must be made more accountable and not be allowed if a specific transfer is going to represent a fundamental risk to human rights. Now, saying that is in no way to imply that we should do this in a way that stifles the ability of people across the world to have access to the secure modern telecommunications networks that they need. New technologies and the internet have fundamentally changed the dynamics between people and their governments to a massively positive effect. The inherent ability of new technologies and mediums to allow people access to information, to allow them to take part in the modern international world, to express themselves, to report, and to organise and act as a force for social good must be fully recognised and wholeheartedly supported. Today in Ethiopia, its people, rural and urban, young and old, are now able to use new technologies, not just to enrich and better their everyday lives, but also to make their government, which has maintained grip on power for over 20 years, more accountable. Instead of this, however, something terrible has happened, and that's that people in Ethiopia are now, instead of seeing these technologies as a tool for empowerment, starting to see them more and more as simply an extension of the state's power over them. People, journalists, artists, the political opposition, despite a massive culture of self-censorship, have been detained unlawfully in an effort to stifle their dissent and, for example, have had full transcripts of their conversations read out to them during their interrogations. People's locations and all the metadata associated to them and those around them now fully available and used by the Ethiopian government. Last year, we filed a criminal complaint on the behalf of Tedesi Kursmo, an Ethiopian political refugee and university lecturer living in London. Evidence shows that Tedesi had been targeted by spyware, which allows its users full remote control access over his laptop. So that's the ability to control the webcam and microphone. In this case, Tedesi had a Skype call leaked online, but the implications for his security, but also to that of his family and his network, are clear. The evidence shows that this was done by a company trading out of Europe. So if you think about that, this is a European company facilitating human rights abuses, presumably by the Ethiopian government, against an individual who had fled to Europe for safety against that government under his rights as a refugee. This is unacceptable, and this goes well beyond spyware technology. On Monday, we released a report, full documents and evidence now available online, showing how Ethiopia is looking to massively increase its surveillance capabilities by tapping its fibre optic networks and storing all the data intercepted for 2 years, all developed and sent to monitoring centres provided by a European company based in Munich. And the surveillance industry is expanding. As more of our lives are lived online and as the internet is increasingly being met with surveillance, the problem is only likely to grow. And that is why we must tackle this now. Not only is this not compatible with European external policy and basically with what it's trying to do in the world, it's also a question of its commitments to human rights and of its values. Now, fixing this is obviously not easy. Like anything of substance, it's a complex and extremely challenging task. Unlike arms, these are civilian technologies which are not easy to define and which aren't as easily regulated. European industry, innovation and the work of security researchers, who are fundamental of ensuring the security of modern networks, not just in Europe, but in Ethiopia as well, must be protected. But this, I think we have to understand, is the main challenge. To say that the smart regulations that we need are not desirable is one thing, but to say that they are simply not possible is unacceptable. And it would be a great mistake, not just for us who happen to be citizens of Europe, but to those living in Ethiopia who also are affected by our decisions. Thanks.